Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. I'm Adrian Fort, and it's about 7 o'clock in the morning, and I just got home from work, and my nose hairs are singed from the bleach you have to use when cleaning public restrooms, and I got in a fight with a vacuum cleaner and lost. And my boss says that I am not detail-oriented. So I know that I will be up for at least a couple hours yet to go. So I figured I would use this time to go ahead and be productive, jump on something that I should have done a long time ago, a while back on the channel. I announced a Q&A and Ask Me Anything, and I never got around to doing it. It was to celebrate 200,000 views. I think instead what I'm going to end up doing is starting a new series called Ask Adrian Anything, and I'm going to use those questions to start this series. And our first question comes from Helene from Books by Lanes, in her stupid accent. She asks, I apologize, do you separate the art from the artist? E.g., if an author turns out to be a rapist, would you still buy their stuff and advertise it on your channel? Now, on the surface, this is a very serious conundrum. Yes, it presents a question that is definitely worth asking, but I think contained therein there are two conceits which we should break down and then discuss even further. And I think that, not that the question actually says this, but reading into the question, it is almost necessarily implied therein. One, these two conceits are almost necessarily implied therein. One, bad people can't have good ideas. Two, need we pay bad people for their intellectual property? And I think to break this down, I ask that you come with me on a thought experiment. One that will prove very painful, I think, for anyone watching this channel, because this channel is based largely around literature and the love thereof. But this thought experiment goes as such. In the summer of 1666, Isaac Newton retreated to his estate to escape the plague. During this time, he redefined the studies of motion and optics. He discovered gravity and invented differential calculus. Much of the work that he did during this retreat fueled the publication of the Principia Mathematica, a book which was so revolutionary that people basically stopped trying and just taught from it for nearly 300 years. Isaac Newton was a bit of a nut. He was an eccentric. He was not a great guy. Neither was he a rapist. So this is where the thought experiment comes in. Let's pretend that the Principia Mathematica was not written by Newton, but was in fact penned by whoever the worst person that you can think of is. For me, the answer, look, Pol Pot, Stalin, so many answers you can go with. Genghis Khan, I wouldn't argue with any of them. For me, the automatic go-to is Hitler. I think that's understandable. You could say someone else, and I wouldn't necessarily argue. I don't think many people would argue that Hitler was not the worst person of all time. So let's pretend that the Principia Mathematica was penned by Adolf Hitler. Would the science therein have carried any less merit? Would those facts that he described be any less true? And I think, obviously, the answer to those questions is no. For me, I believe that literature is in itself a kind of truth. So, perhaps instead of a failed painter, Adolf Hitler had been a failed writer. Would the following bits of truth have been any less vital? This coming from Bukowski, and you get so alone at times, it just makes sense. How is your heart? During my worst times, on the park benches, in the jails, or living with whores, I always had this certain contentment. I wouldn't call it happiness. It was more of an inner balance that settled for whatever was occurring. And it helped in the factories, and when relationships went wrong with girls, it helped through the wars and the hangovers, the back alley fights, the hospitals, to awaken in a cheap room in a strange city and pull up the shade. This was the craziest kind of contentment. And to walk across the floor in an old dresser with a cracked mirror, see myself ugly, grinning at it all. What matters the most is how well you walk through the fire. Or perhaps this bit from Hemingway. Once there had been a tinted photograph of his wife on the wall, but he had taken it down because it made him too lonely to see it, and it was on the shelf in the corner under his clean shirt. "What do you have to eat?" the boy asked. "A pot of yellow rice with fish. Do you want some?" "No, I will eat at home." "Do you want me to make the fire?" "No, I will make it later on. Or I may eat the rice cold." "May I cast the net?" "Of course." There was no cast net, and the boy remembered when they had sold it, but they went through this fiction every day. There was no pot of yellow rice and fish, and the boy knew this too. Or perhaps this bit, which you might recognize. To be or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to take arms against the sea of troubles, and, by opposing, end them, to die, to sleep, no more, and by a sleep to say we end the heartache and the thousand natural shocks that this flesh is heir to. Would those bits of literature have been any less true, any less vital, had they been penned by the absolute worst person of all time? I am afraid that they would not. Perhaps it would say something about us that they were penned by the worst person of all time instead of by three gentlemen who were probably slimy in their own way. But it would not negate them. As for issue number 2, need we feed their dereliction? Well, Helene, you are an intelligent and enterprising young woman, and while I would never urge anyone to break the law, rebels are always more fun to talk to. Now, as I will be continuing this series, this Ask Adrian Anything series, the questions need not be literature related, though I imagine most of them will be, as this is a channel centered around literature. But if you have any ideas for future episodes, questions that you would like to ask, leave them in the comments below, and hopefully I will get around to them eventually.